Jar Binks. You are listening to Behind the Lens.
And thank you for that, Jar Jar Binks. All of our regular listeners know that is the incomparable Stephen Alaric, who does the Jar Jar Binks voice for us. And it actually is what got him his role on Broadway playing Simba. So, but we played it today for a very, very special little guest that we have in studio today. For all of you, our new listeners, regular listeners, welcome to Behind the Lens. I'm Debbie Elias, film critic, creator, and host of Behind the Lens. And you can find my movie reviews and interviews in print and online 24/7 around the globe. But every Monday, I am right here, adrenalineradio.com, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And today we have very, very special guests. Joining us at the half-hour mark, calling in, are the co-directors, producers of the Millionaires Unit, an astounding documentary, an important part of American history. Ron King and Derek GREER will be calling. But first, we have in studio the fabulous Jenna St. John, Kevin Good, and Chaucer Good. Here to talk about Jenna and Kevin's film, Dinner with the Alchemist. Our regular listeners know they were last on the show, calling in back in 2016 before the film debuted at its world premiere at Dances with Films. And it's now in distribution. And they're back.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Oh, I am thrilled. I am thrilled to have you guys here. And I'm thrilled to have Chaucer here.
Say hello, Chaucer.
I don't know if Chaucer can. He's happy with his pacifier. But, you know,
these are the brave new world of indie filmmaking / parenting. It's a learning process.
Well, you know, and in between making Dinner with the Alchemist, making Chaucer.
We can't talk about that on the radio.
No, we can't. We can't. We, you know, for FCC rules, and we keep Nick, station owner Nick, very happy. But you also have done a couple television pilots, Gwendolyn Dangerous and Sexpectation.
That is correct.
Both of which also showed at Dances with Films this year.
Yes.
Yeah, we're keeping busy. And so now what we're trying to do, we're doing a couple more episodes of Sexpectations so that we can put it out on our own because we just kind of like to do things. And then Jenna has another feature script that we're doing a read-through on this Thursday. Actually, that's hopefully going to be the next movie that we film.
Oh.
So it's just the first draft of the script, a little read through.
Does it require a baby?
It does not require a baby.
Never.
Yeah.
You know, Jenna, when you write these things, Jenna is the prolific writer of the two.
Mm-hmm.
So, and, you know, Dinner with the Alchemist is all about Jenna. So tell, for the new listeners and to refresh the memories of our regular listeners who have heard about Dinner with the Alchemist before, tell everybody what the film is about. And there are true elements to this, people, and how you came up with this very interesting idea of alchemy and voodoo and murder crossing.
I'll talk about how I came upon the story first. My sister and I went to New Orleans for a vacation, and my sister doesn't drink. So we spend a lot of our time there just checking out the good eats. And we're both history buffs. And so there's a lot of dark history there, a lot of really spooky history. And a ton of it just seemed too weird to be true, too spooky to be true. So we were just looking for any evidence of them being real, and we came upon the story of these murders in New Orleans.
In the like microfiche archive of the library there, right? Yeah.
And we just thought this has to be a movie already. So of course we looked it up, and it wasn't. So I had to write it.
You know, how old when did these murders take place? Was it at the turn of the century?
It was. It was between 1902 and 1905.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many murders were there?
I mean, scores. It was for years. And the crazy thing about it is the movie doesn't even touch on, it touches on a very short time period.
Mm-hmm.
of these murders. And in the movie, everything is condensed in the timeline. It doesn't take place over the course of several years. But some 27 years later, very similar murders took place. And another, 10 years after that, there was another set of murders that took place. And they actually caught that guy alive. He was in a mental institution. And
You think?
yeah. But he was a survivor from the second set of murders. It's insane. I mean, the whole thing is just crazy. This could easily turn into what is a 3-movie?
A trilogy.
A trilogy. Oh my goodness.
This is what motherhood does to indie filmmakers.
Sleep deprivation. It's real.
It's real.
I was gonna call it a 3 sequel.
A 3 sequel.
You know,
a 3 sequel.
a threesome movie.
Yeah.
And Pam is sitting in the engineering booth trying to contain herself laughing at this. Careful, we're going to let you hold Chaucer. I mean, this is just, it's such a fertile area.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen so many things. You know, Mario Van Peebles has a new series that he just did called Superstition that brings in the supernatural and the occult and murders and dead
Right.
people and things like that. And it all stems from down south.
Right.
I mean, I think it's fascinating. But now, with so much to pick from in this timeline of the serial killings, how did you develop your construct for this script and hone in on this idea of the alchemist, you know, Jacques Saint Germain, and our voodoo priestess, and a brothel, of which you remember.
Right. Well, you have to have a brothel if you're going to write about...
And if you're going to write about it, you want to be in it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
So how do you, as a writer, develop, because this is not just an ensemble piece that's a contained piece. You have a multiplicity of locations.
Mm-hmm.
You've got social strata
Right.
that you're crossing over. It's not just one class of people. You're intermixing everything, all of which then Kevin has to deal with as a director and come up with the whole visual palette and the visual tonal bandwidth to
Right.
go with this. But how do you as a writer develop this? Or did he get any input? Or
Kevin is my constant reader, so I'll write 5 pages, give it to him, and he'll tell me what's wrong with it. And but I had already written so many drafts of the script, and then I had to trash all of it, which was painful but necessary. It was just, I'd say the first 7 drafts were just me getting to know the characters, and then had to scrap it all and then start again. And Kevin told me, forget about producibility. Just write the movie that you want to see, and then we'll do a producibility pass. And we never did that.
You know, that's the pass where you combine characters, combine locations, you delete the big mob scene, you just figure out okay, that's the movie that you wrote, and now here's the movie that we can afford to make. And we never got around to doing that pass. We just sort of went for it.
and I gotta say, went for it, you guys did. Because, I mean, your cinematography, and I know we've talked about it before, Gus's cinematography is just beautiful. But then your production design, the way you capture the period, and then your music. So all of these elements then bring Jenna's incredible script to life. But I'm curious, you know, and even the girls in the brothel, each one has a very distinct personality. Especially our virgin prostitute orphan Mary. Yes, you heard that right, people. Virgin prostitute orphan Mary.
Yes.
Okay, how did you come up with that? Or was that Kevin's idea?
In the earlier versions of the script, she loses her virginity. And it just seemed more interesting. To have her, as I was developing the character, and nearly everybody back then in New Orleans was a devout Catholic. So to have her, give her that, I guess, that backbone, and that being an important part of her. So I just thought it was a more interesting character to have that be vital to her, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Mary's actually quite smart about what's happening around.
Absolutely. And that was a very difficult role to cast. Not that we had easy roles to cast, but she changes so much
Mm-hmm.
in the course of the movie. She turns into a pretty brazen woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she's one of the characters that's based on historical fact, right? So
Right.
the real life prostitute was what, 15 years old?
Right.
Yeah, it was tough times back then.
Yeah.
So the real life prostitute was 15 years old, so that's about what we were targeting for the actress. And it's just really hard to find an actress in that age range that can
Play
that can
that
do the range,
role.
right?
Yeah.
That can have that range. So yeah, go Megan Graves. Great
Yeah.
job. Yeah.
Absolutely.
She's amazing.
Yeah,
she-
she's incredible.
I mean, and that's something that's very key with the characters that you've written, with the characters you've created, is your casting. Because they fully form and embody the
Mhm.
characters. And I don't know how you as a director lucked out to have, such perfectly cast people that can, because not everybody can actually do period piece, as you as an actress know
Right.
well, Jenna. They can't do it. But here, everybody really embodied the various social strata
Mhm.
and the time and what the expectations of each type of person in that time.
Right.
We just did. I mean, honestly, we did a ton of casting, and for some of the roles, like Jacques the Alchemist, we knew Don previously, and he's actually the only person we read for it. One of the cool little secrets of the movie, I think, is that we produced it in the Washington D.C. area mostly, and then a few days in New Orleans, but we cast it out of the Washington D.C. area. And D.C. has just a thriving theater scene, and a lot of people that are hungry to do more screen acting. That are doing a lot of theater, and not everybody can make that switch. Not every actor that is great on stage is going to be great on the screen,
Right.
but maybe like half of them will be. So it's a great talent pool to tap into. But some of the roles, like Mary, how did you portray her? The virgin prostitute orphan. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mary the virgin prostitute orphan, and our Marie Laveau were really hard to cast, and I mean we saw probably 50 people. After going through headshots and or tapes, then we actually probably brought in about 50 people to read for Marie Laveau before we found our Marie Laveau, Dion Audain.
And Dion is she is utterly astounding. There is not a minute you do not believe that she is a voodoo priestess. She is amazing. And to see her go toe-to-toe with Dan as Jacques Saint-Germain, the two of them together have an incredible chemistry, and you can feel them bouncing off of each other.
Right.
And it really plays so well on screen and just draws you deeper into this already fascinating story.
Yeah.
Right. I think the hardest part of finding our Marie was she had to play someone very prideful and strong, very guarded, but have these moments of vulnerability. So to find an actress that could bring both sides believably and well, it was tough. But our casting director, Joy Haynes, knew Dion. And as soon as she read the script, she was like, "You have to read Dion." She's like, "This is Dion." Yeah.
Give that woman a raise. But now, how do you, once you have the script and these rich characters on the page, and now you have them cast, how do you as a director then approach this, Kevin? Because the wealth of ambient nature, your visual effects, I am absolutely enamored with these incredible VFX montages you have in the film of alchemy and voodoo, Chaucer likes that too. He likes that too. So I'm curious how you then go about developing the whole look and feel, bearing in mind you then have to edit this together.
Yeah, I mean, I think indie filmmaking is just like sort of, there's a lot of seat of your pants stuff, right? And I feel like it's almost like meditation, where the world is throwing, and I'm sure making a multi-million-dollar movie is the same thing, but making a more modestly budgeted movie like this, I feel like.
Well, wait a minute. You mean you don't know what it's like to make a multi-million-dollar movie?
No, I'm pretty sure they're going to give me the next Star Wars, but until then,
okay.
Until then, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or directing the new Star Wars TV series spin-offs that are going to happen from the Game of Thrones writers.
I mean, I feel like Disney wants to make so much money off Star Wars that like everybody's going to get to direct. You're going to get to direct a Star Wars. I'm going to get to direct a Star Wars.
I want to
Chaucer
produce one.
Yeah.
I want to produce one. You can direct.
There you go. So on a more modest movie, I feel like it's almost like a, you just really need to find the spots where you can make it work and can make it work well. And one was locations. So we spent a lot of time location scouting, and the Washington D.C. area for our interiors was pretty useful for that, in that we found a lot of sort of ready to go places, more or less, that looked like a little time capsule. And I think just having this sort of like this constantly having this mantra of like, is this the best way to be spending our time to have things end up well on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole of like this visual effect or this thing that you wanted to happen. And indie film directing is just sort of like constantly killing your babies, your virtual babies, not your real babies.
Not your real ones.
I love my real baby.
Cover your ears, Chaucer. Cover your ears.
It's constantly murdering your virtual director babies, like every day, right? Every day it would just be like we're filming, and I just like rip 3 pages out of the script. It's like, okay, we're not going to get to those because they're not the most important bit, and they may or may not have made the edit, and there was something about them that we loved, but I need to make a command decision, and this other stuff is more important, and we need to focus on it. So I'm editing the movie as we go. I'm cutting bits out. A lot of the stuff that I thought, like, as a director, you carefully storyboard some sequences and you come up with all this cool stuff that you think is going to be what everybody pats you on the back for later. All that just gets lost on the way because you have to just sort of keep that meditative idea of like, okay, what is this end experience going to be like for an audience? What is the most important thing for us to be spending our time on right now to tell this story and to make it impactful? And I don't know. It's tough. I don't know. I forget what the question was. Well, I definitely didn't answer it.
Well, you have so many subplots going on. There is nothing superfluous here. You don't have anything extraneous in terms of characters or story. It's very tight. Everything connect. You do an excellent job of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and connecting everything, so that when we get to the end of the film, granted, and I said this before, I'm going to say it again. Those of you, when you watch the film, you have to see it all the way to the very, very, very end after the credits, because there is a lovely little Easter egg there, and God, I want to see a sequel, or a twofer, or a two-filmer, whatever Jenna wants to call it, because tying everything up here, but you're set up for the, oh my God, what's coming next?
And Jenna just deserves credit for that because it's just a lot of writing work. And I think, people who haven't seen the movie yet, and again, you can watch this tomorrow.
Yes.
Tomorrow, anybody can watch it. It's out. But it kind of has almost like a Paul Thomas Anderson vibe, where it's one of those, like Magnolia or like, excuse me, one of his
You
movies.
have a bottle of water there,
True that, yeah. One of those movies that just is that, huge ensemble cast, and you don't quite know how everybody's going to tie together, and then, we kind of bring everybody together at the end, and I think that's the fun of it. Since this movie, Jenna actually wrote a pilot script for this as like an hour-long episodic kind of like cable show.
Ooh.
Yeah. It works really well like that because it does let you. It lets you sort of expand out of all these characters and all this stuff.
Please.
So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes. I would love to see that.
Our composer actually encouraged me to write that script, and it was a finalist at CineQuest, and
the script was a finalist at CineQuest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in their script competition. So it's a good script, and I think it is actually, it is something where, you could see this assortment of characters and this thing as this ensemble piece, kind of like a Paul Thomas Anderson movie in a movie form, or it does kind of lend itself a lot to, if we wanted to expand it into sort of a cable drama universe, I think is where it would sit. You know, one of these 10 episode season hour-long cable dramas where, you know, we get to dive down all these different little rabbit holes and nooks and crannies that New Orleans has to offer.
Ooh, and just think of all the research and history that you can delve into, Jenna.
I can't wait.
But you know, hey, I got to give a shout out to John Piscatello, your composer, since it was his idea for you to draft a script.
Absolutely.
For an hour long.
Yeah.
And I got to say, John's music in Dinner with the Alchemist is amazing. It's ominous. It fits the period. It's perfect.
He's great. I just hope he doesn't get too big to like work with us in the near future, because he's been knocking him out of the park and doing a lot of great soundtracks. And you know, I think just finding a movie like this, and again, it's kind of like that balancing act of like being indie but still wanting to be epic. You know, I feel like too often indie movies. Sorry, all the indie filmmakers who are listening. I feel like too often indie movies like take that advice of like, well, you want to sort of do what you can tackle well, which is like, you know, put a few people in one house, you know, a few characters, one location, modern day, keep it simple, and like, yeah, that's much more manageable, and by all means, like, I would be a more sane person right now if we had tried to do that. But I think tackling a big world is more fun. You know, it helps it stand out, for one thing, and it's more fun. That's why we go to the movies. You know, I go to the movies to be taken away and have an experience and have a world. And I think the soundtrack is sort of like the same thing, where, you know, obviously we can't hire out the London Philharmonic to do the score here, but then so what is the balancing act there, where, you know, we do get something that feels fresh and doesn't sound like every other indie soundtrack that kind of just feels like somebody sat down at their keyboard and played a chord.
Well, John used live musicians for this, did he not?
Absolutely. He used live musicians, and a lot of it is centered around a harp, right? So you have that feeling of the harp through the whole movie, kind of texturing the soundtrack, and I mean, it's lovely. And then like keeping to like the smaller ensemble like that, and just a few musicians instead of having to hire out a huge orchestra, allows us to have live musicians, which I think is important to the kind of texture of the period piece, rather than a bunch of keyboard music, you know, without breaking the bank, or, you know, just not being able to do it outright. So, yeah.
And you're right. It is the music is very much in keeping. He's happy. Chaucer's happy. The music is very much in keeping with the period, because there wasn't electronic keyboards and things like that.
There wasn't.
So you really get the feel of the bow on the strings and the squeak that comes with it sometimes.
Yeah, and our New Orleans was also sort of a pre-jazz New Orleans, right? You hear a little bit of Scott Joplin playing in a piano bar at one point. But it's not kind of what people associate with like the music of New Orleans today, because we were in an era before that. So so it was a curious little challenge for the soundtrack to, like, you know, we want to make it feel like this mystical world, but at the same time, you know, you say New Orleans to people, the first thing that comes out of somebody's mouth is jazz, you know, nowadays.
First thing that comes up to my mind with New Orleans is voodoo.
Okay. Well, you're the target audience for our movie then. You should really watch this movie. I think you'll like it. You should check it out.
Think?
It's on demand tomorrow. You can
well, you know, you have to thank your original publicist, Clayton Ferris, because Clayton got this to me 2 years ago.
True.
You know, so it's all him.
Yeah.
He must have sensed that I would go for the voodoo.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is one of the fascinating things with this film, is you see the whole idea, the science of alchemy, and then the mysticism of voodoo, and you see them play out against each other. And it's just so beautifully done, as I mentioned, in those montages that you and Gus put together. It's gorgeous to watch this, and it's very hypnotic, very mesmerizing.
Not to keep talking about doing movies on the cheap, because I don't think people, like, hopefully someone watches this and they don't think to themselves, boy, Kevin really scrimped and saved here, but that's kind of the point. But like those sequences were something where we were struggling, because basically, you know, set-wise, originally in the script, I was thinking of it as like these much bigger like alchemy lab sequences, right? And it would be kind of almost like I don't know, a Willy Wonka's playhouse or Edison in his lab and like all these things. And instead we went for something that I could just work on day after day after day in our apartment. And that was like this hyper macro stuff of the alchemy and the chemical reactions happening. Right. And it's like taking something where I have all the freedom to just go ahead and work on this as I please in our apartment, but we can therefore we can really take the time to make it look cool and just like be mesmerizing. We spent days and days and days just like with the super macro lens on, dropping powders into flames and doing.
I know, and what it does with color when you drop that stuff in, because you never know what's going to happen when you drop certain powders into a flame or things like that, and it's just so rich. It's very lush looking.
Yeah.
And the entire visual palette has a lushness to it.
Yeah, and I think like for example, like the macro, I think you see other directors who are like famous and stuff now, who do the same sort of tricks that they sort of learned when they were doing their little indie thing, and now they, that was how they made it interesting in the indie thing, and now that's how they're doing it for a bigger movie. Sorry, I'm forgetting his name. The director of Shaun of the Dead. Drawing
Edward Wright.
Edgar Wright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Edgar,
Okay.
yeah.
Where he does all those like sort of fast cut transition things, and you can kind of see how like, oh, that was probably a way in like an indie of making this like really impactful without having to sort of overcomplicate things essentially. But then you see that's like his visual language now, and that's still what he does. Right. Or like Christopher Nolan with Memento and his time shifting and putting things like that's kind of his deal, is playing around with the narrative order of things to say, okay, here's the linear thing, and how can we make this the most interesting thing possible by rearranging things. And you still see him doing that in Dunkirk, where it's all cattywampus and everything is out of order, because that's the thing that he's developed, because that's just sort of how he thinks about it. And it's not, putting everything out of order doesn't make the movie any harder to produce,
right?
But it gives it this Nolan texture.
Well, what was the most challenging thing for each of you in bringing Dinner with the Alchemist to life? I know Jenna's going to take. Are you taking Chaucer out for a minute?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Bye, Chaucer.
Bye, Chaucer.
He did pretty well, but he was getting vocal there.
He did a half an hour.
I think I can probably answer for both of us. That is, the most challenging thing is just sort of like not knowing if you're going to get to this point. Like, this is a big relief. Like, the movie comes out tomorrow, people can watch it, and I think you ask a lot of people. There were so many favors called in. There's so much asked of people to try to help us create this vision, and you don't know if you're gonna be able to make it to the finish line. We don't have big financiers behind us. Our New Orleans shoot was insanely scheduled. We're filming on the streets of the French Quarter without being able to block them off, so we're just being heckled by drunks the whole time. It was ridiculous. Don, the lead, the alchemist, said that that was the hardest night of filming of his life, was when we filmed the opening scene of the movie, and it was just a dialogue between him and Mary. And we got heckled for hours. It felt like it took an hour to get through each line, because just so many drunks were like heckling us. And we didn't have a rain schedule. We didn't have any way of. There was no plan B. Like, if we had gone down there and it had rained, that was like half our budget to travel down there. It was about half our budget, and if it had just decided to dump rain on us that day, we wouldn't have a movie.
Oh my God!
Right? So, I don't know. The spirits of New Orleans smiled on us, ish. The drunks of New Orleans did not smile on us, but they're not from there.
They did other things, but we're not going to talk about those. Oh my God!
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Last week, Ethan Warren was guest on the show, and he's got his new film out, West of Her, and he did a road trip, and all over over 3,700 miles, driving all over the United States, shooting. Very, very Terrence Malick kind of feel to it.
Okay.
But there again, it's you show up somewhere and it's, well, it looked like it might rain. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it would. Can we get this shot? Do we have to change this shot? How are we going to luck out? Rachel Morrison, Academy Award nominee for cinematography on Mudbound. I talked at length with Rachel about shooting Mudbound in the Deep South. And she said, oh, it rained every day at some point during every day. And you can't do it. She wanted to do a 360 with cameras. She couldn't do 360s with cameras. She had to try and, wheel things on apple carts through the mud just to try and get shots. And it was, okay, maybe this is going to work. Maybe this isn't going to work. So everybody goes through that. Well, if it works, hey, we lucked out.
Yeah. My plan was, which just seems stupid in hindsight, was like, well, if it rains, we'll just tuck under some of the, we'll just find spots like more like tucked under, because everything in New Orleans has those Spanish balconies, so a lot of the sidewalks are essentially covered.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, if it rains, I mean, we basically have cover. It was a terrible idea. It wouldn't have worked.
Oh my God.
Although it would have cut down on the drunks, so maybe it would have been like,
they could have been hiding under there too.
Yeah.
So that may not have worked.
Right. People who travel to New Orleans to get hammered for a few days aren't going to be stopped by some rain.
No, they're
Right.
not. They're not. So, you going to stick around?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, all right. Because Pam is about ready to hook up our next two guests. And, oh, it's so bad. Jenna's not in here. It even has a little booklet inside of it. So, bring them on live, Pam. She's playing. And welcome. I think we have Ron King and Derek Greer on the line. Are you there, guys?
Indeed. Hi, Deb. Yeah, this is Derek.
Hi, Derek. You there, Ron?
It's Ron. I'm here as well.
I am so excited. Here in studio with me is director Kevin Good, who's just been talking about his film, which is available tomorrow, Dinner with the Alchemist.
Hey, Derek and Ron.
Hey, how are you, Kevin? Hi.
And he is sitting here now studying the DVD box, and this is, I have to say, one of my favorite documentaries that I have seen in a long time. The history you bring to life, the personal stories, the sentimentality of these men, absolutely astounding. And then you look at all these archival photos and footage and your recreations. And I got to say, the Sop with Camel, and you got it from Peter Jackson to film? Come on. Come on. This is...
Well, thank you, Debbie.
I love this documentary, and I cannot encourage people enough to see it. It is a piece of American history that is so important, that impacts us to this very day because of these naval aviators. Guys, I know this has been a long journey for you to get to this point with this film.
Indeed.
How did this, tell the listeners basically what this is the story of and how this came to you and what made you decide this had to be a movie?
Well, Ron, why don't you take
Well, I'll take the introductory story. For me, this was a situation where I was at a point in my life where I wanted to make some sort of a feature-length film, but I wasn't quite sure what that film would be. And one day I happened to be in a bookstore and saw a stack of books that for some reason attracted my attention. I wasn't sure why. Strolled over to it, and there was a photograph on the cover of a new release that included my grandfather. And I recognized him right away, even though it wasn't a photo I had ever seen before when he was about 20-some years old. And the title of the book was The Millionaires Unit, and I realized right away what the story was about because it was known in my family that my grandfather had been a naval aviator back in World War I, but I certainly didn't know the details. And in reading Mark Wortman's book, his wonderful book, I discovered much of what happened with my grandfather in World War I and was astonished. I subsequently got in touch with Mark, and he invited me to sit on a panel in New York City at the Yale Club with some of the other descendants of the Yale unit members, this group from Yale, this young group of men who put together this privately funded air militia. and Mark, I had asked Mark, is anybody making a documentary about this story? And Mark said not to his knowledge. And I told him the reason I was interested is because I'd love to see it. And he said, well, maybe you might want to think about doing a documentary. And so that sort of synced up with my desire to make a film, and that's when I got in touch with Darroch about helping to make the film, because Darroch and I were old friends from college days, and Darroch had subsequently become a producer and a filmmaker and a documentarian on his own. That was his career. So he was the perfect person to get in touch with, and then the two of us kind of got together and tried to figure out how we were going to make it into a documentary. But that's how it got started.
I mean, I love that, Ron. I want to make a film. I don't know what I make. I want to make a film, and then you decided this is the film to start with. This is your feature. And it makes me think of Kevin sitting here. It's like, I want to make a feature. I want to direct a feature. You know, problems be damned. I'm going to do it. And you had Darroch to come on board to help you with all those problems be damned. And
Luckily.
and bring this to life. You know, how did you go? The research for this film had to be intense. And with everything that you have uncovered and unearthed to bring to light these personal stories, these diaries, photographs that nobody's ever seen before, that families have been holding dear and close to them, for decades. How do you go about amassing all of this and structuring it into a coherent storyline?
Well, the research really was intense. The research really was intense, and I've always loved American history, and I've done a lot of research, mostly in 19th century America. I really didn't know anything about World War I. But we had Mark's book that was a general outline, but then we got into the letters, and because Truby Davison was left behind, when everyone else went to Europe for the war, they all wrote letters to him, and his papers are in Yale at the Sterling Library. And so we started picking out the characters that we liked, and we saw the big moments, when they first learn to fly, when they get their Navy wings, when they ship overseas, when they're assigned to their various assignments, and start putting the story that way, but together that way. But it was very important to put that in the context of the development of naval aviation and how naval aviation fit into World War I and what part America played in World War I. Mm-hmm. So I spent several weeks in New Haven, often staying at Mark Wortman, the author of the book, at his house. And actually, Mark is coming out to California this weekend. That we get to return the favor because he's coming out here for our L.A. premiere on Saturday night. Also the photographs, and I saw a pretty standard traditional documentary of photos, but very quickly Ron and I realized we really need to tell the story of the planes. Mm-hmm. We had seen some World War I aviation films we didn't really like. And then, luckily, we found this collector in Central California, and we got to see his collection of planes, all with original engines, 100-year-old original engines, and hear them and see them in action. And that was really bracing. And we thought, well, we really have to show the audience what it took to fly these planes. So they understood the danger and also the drama. But then we really pinpointed the Sopwith Camel because one of our characters, Dave Ingalls, he was the Navy's only ace in World War I, and he won his acedom by flying a camel. And then Kenny McLeish, probably our most romantic character, lost his life in a Sopwith Camel. And there were only 3 in the world. There was one mothballed in England that'd be very expensive. Our friend in California didn't want to get up in the air with a helicopter and all of that rigmarole. And then Sir Peter Jackson, of the director of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, is a huge World War I aficionado. He has dozens of planes, and he had a Camel with an original engine. And we called them up and said, this is what we want to do. This is how much money we have. And they said, come on out. And we did.
Wait a minute. You had money to make this movie?
Well, that's why it took 7 years to make. A lot of that was fundraising. And you asked, how do you stick with a subject or a movie that long? And part of it was that the movie just kept getting bigger. Ron and I would dream about, wouldn't it be great if we could do this or if we could do that? And then in the end, I have to say, all of our dreams came true. We got to make the movie as big as we wanted it to be.
Wow.
So you guys actually filmed real planes in the air for this, is what I'm understanding.
We did. We rented a helicopter, and a gentleman who had developed this brand new, very fancy camera mount for the front of the helicopter came and delivered it up to Peter Jackson's aerodrome, and we could only afford it for 3 hours, so we had very detailed shot lists.
Okay, and was that to recreate
from the helicopter?
Was that to recreate moments in the film, or was that how do you come about a shot list like that when you think, oh boy, we have 3 hours for this shaky old 100-year-old plane and we have to get it right?
Well, looking over the story, we wanted to. They're learning to fly, and then they fly more sophisticated planes, and so we wanted to build in that drama, and each time you got to a flying sequence, have it be better than the one before. And then we picked out the most important battles that they were involved in. And so we had, I don't know, maybe 5 different battles. And how are we seeing it? From what angle are we looking at the plane? And so we had a Cessna that we could take a door off of either side. And so when are we behind and to the right of the plane? When are we to the left of the plane? When are we looking back at the plane? When are we looking forward? And which can handle these best? And we only had the helicopter for 3 hours. We had the Cessna for 3 days. And so in breaking down all those shot lists, it wasn't a chronological sequence. It was divided all over the place. And we just had to hope that through getting all of those shots, they were then going to add up to the sequences we needed.
Well,
and they did.
I mean, the sequences are outstanding. And then what you also did that I love is with a lot of these archival photos, you then applied VFX animation overlays to actually enhance the realism of actual bombings and actual battles once you really get into Bob Lovett's story, where he then started piloting land bombers to hit the German subs in Belgium instead of just doing surveillance with seaplanes. And you really enhance that, and it is so realistic. It blew my mind watching it. And you have the map overlays so we can see exactly where it is. And the fact you bring Dunkirk into it, how timely is this? So, I mean, that's something that everybody can tap into. Dunkirk, and it's not the Academy Award film. It's a real place.
Yeah.
Through it all, you also intersperse these great stories and interviews with relatives. Ron, you are a relative. You're the grandson of John Voorhees, who was part of the unit. He then went on to fly recon in World War II. 10-term congressman from Ohio. This is, you got some great lineage going on here.
Yes, well, 2 of our other producers were also grandsons and of the Yale unit members. Harry Davison is the grandson of Truby Davison, and Mike Davison happened to be the grandson of both Truby Davison and Dave Ingalls. So we had a lot of family who eventually got involved in making the film, and so I would say that a large part of the effort is sort of a legacy and a dedication to the original effort that these guys made back in 1916.
And I have to say, it's the history that you also bring in, the history of the Naval Air Reserve. Truby Davison, of course, he was one of the key components of putting the initial group together. He unfortunately didn't get his wings because crashed into the water and ended up with a back injury. But he then went on to become the Deputy Secretary of War for the Air in World War II, and was heavily involved. Another one of the guys, Bob Lovett. Lovett went on, what was he? He was Secretary of Defense during Korea, acting Secretary of State during World War II. I mean, these guys, they weren't one-shot deals. And we see this, but then I couldn't help the whole time as we're seeing their stories unfold, going back to the boys, when they all started out with forming this Yale unit, they had to get permission from their parents to fly.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story. The characters and the story arc are all there for a great big drama.
And the letters that were being written back from when they were all in Paris, and they were meeting ladies of the evening for the first time. Seems to be a theme today.
Well, Robert Lovett love letters to his girlfriend and then fiancée are just remarkable, and really to cap his character's experience in the film, we needed to do the bombing sequence, and it took place at night. And so how do you do a night bombing sequence from 100 years ago? Mm-hmm. And through a combination of Ron used models and photographs, and we found a great team of computer-generated imaging animators in New Hampshire. And we put together, shot by shot, a sequence that I feel like kind of works, that gives you some sort of idea of what it might be like to go bombing over Belgium at night. And there you have it.
I'm curious how you approach the editing, because I know Kevin is an editor, and that's primarily, I think that's been one of your big vocations, has been editing, correct, Kevin?
That's kind of what pays the bills so that I can spend all that money on indie movies. Yeah.
So
good for you.
So how do you approach editing something with this kind of history, with the amount of footage that you are accumulating through interviews, through the archival materials, and through the recreations? Was editing a work in progress? Did you wait till the end and then say, okay, let's cull through it all? How was that process?
No, it was very much a work in progress.
I was going to say,
was somebody else
real
speaking?
quick, that in the beginning we started working right away, but I'll let Derek talk about
it. We had 3 different editors, not by chance, but by the amount of time it took to make the film. And the first one prepped all of our photographs, and we just started adding the story together using still photographs. And then when we would get some footage with one of our very first grant for $25,000, we went to the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome in New York and filmed some planes. And then Ron and I would put together maybe a 20-minute sequence, and we would go to the East Coast for more production, and we would show 20 minutes at the Dolby Screening House and invite people that we would hope give us money, and we would get a check for $100 or $50, and and go off with our tail between our legs and keep our nose to the grindstone. Then we got another editor in who's a pilot and had a very good feeling for motion and movement. And then finally we got a finishing editor in who's also a very good storyteller. But it sort of went section by section, and many hours of sitting down, reviewing the edits to make sure we were using the right and best photograph in each instance, and making the sequences move as much as possible. When you're working with ephemera and black and white photographs, you don't want people to go to sleep. So hopefully we succeeded there.
Well, I definitely think you did. And I love the way you chapterize this. You've got, your bug in the bonnet, the real stuff, eye for an eye, which is really interesting. And then how very young we were, that caps everything up as we see what happened to. You fill us in and tell us what happened to these great guys. Was it difficult to find those thematic chapters?
It sort of happened naturally. In the sequences, except for the last epilogue, the sequences are generally about the same length. The difficulty was getting planes in early enough. It took us 22 minutes before a plane went up in the air, and we kept thinking, can we cut this down? But there was a lot of information we just felt like people needed to know to really be invested in the characters. But it was rather natural. They get together and train and get their wings. Then they go to Europe and meet some tragedy. Then they really dig in and finish out the war. And then the epilogue of what they made of their lives.
So now I know, Derek, you got to travel. You got to go overseas to Belgium. Ron, did you get to go anywhere other than within the continental United States?
Well, I mean, my journey as a filmmaker in terms of actually shooting was really quite fun. I started out in the United States, as you say, and I was doing some shoots completely solo, where I was, doing the interview, I was shooting, I was recording the sound, which I honestly do not recommend for filmmakers. I mean, sometimes you have to do that, but if you can have at least one other person, that really helps. And Derek, of course, came on board, and then he and I did some as a two-person crew, and then our crew sort of expanded over time. So by the time we got to New Zealand, which I did get to go to New Zealand, so that was very cool. I was the ground cameraman with one of Peter Jackson's red cameras out of his collection of cameras, as well as airplanes. And so I did a lot of those shots from the ground that we used. Derek also shot from the ground. And then we actually worked with one of Peter's cameramen who shot from the air, plus the guy who developed the shot over camera, John Coyle, also did some shooting from the air. So, by the time we moved on 5 years down the road from the beginning, when it was just one person, we had a crew of several camera people, and so I got a chance to travel to all those places and meet all those people and work with them, which was fantastic.
So obviously by that point you were getting checks that were bigger than $50.
Indeed. Yeah. I should add that Ron got to shoot from a Piper Cub and from a speedboat shooting across Lake Keuka as we were trying to catch up to the only flying F-boat in the world.
Did you guys have you guys been up in the period planes yourselves, or did you only film them from afar?
Well, they're only single-seaters, so there was no room. But along with that, I got to fly in a couple Tiger Moths and a few Stearmen, and so I've been in some 20s and 30s planes, which is pretty fun.
Awesome.
They're very simple.
Yeah. Now
But
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Debbie?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to briefly talk about Europe, that I thought it was, we needed to get some stuff done in Europe. And my sister lived in London. And Ron pointed me to a camera that I should buy. And I convinced our board to let me go, that I could do it cheaply. And so I filmed in Belgium and France and in England. And most notably, I took a ferry ride from Hull, England, into Zeebrugge Harbor. And that's the big harbor where the Germans had taken over, and that was their sub base, from which they sailed all of their submarines, and the place that Robert Lovett wanted to bomb so that he didn't have to search for them all over the North Sea and the English Channel. And I got some really lovely shots at night, at sunset, at dawn, and then moving into Zeebrugge Harbor was really fun.
So
and Dunkirk as well, as you say.
So in other words, I know Kevin's sitting here. I see the wheels of his head turning here. It's like, all right, they got somebody to let me buy a camera.
So, and you guys might want to totally dodge this question and not answer it, but was safety ever a thing? Like, you're taking some old right? Like, it's this is not a simple. Some of these are not simple shoots. You're taking antiques into the air, literally. Were there ever stomach churning moments of engines dying or anything like that?
I don't think I really knew what we were getting into when we started, and it was tough getting experimental aircraft insurance. But my wife is an insurance broker, and so her company did help us out. But I have to say, since we did that, 2 of the pilots that we filmed with both died in airplane crashes.
Oh my God!
Oh no!
One in a World War II plane, and another in a World War I plane.
After shooting this, obviously, this was not.
Yeah. We sort of hit a golden period there in making the film. We filmed this F-boat on Lake Huco, where the Glenn Hammond Curtis Museum is. And that's never going to fly again. It flew one weekend, and we filmed it. And then a friend of ours had a collection, and he passed away. And Peter Jackson is not as active with his vintage Aviator anymore. And so we're actually making another World War I aviation film, and having a hard time finding all the planes we need.
Have you hit up Harrison Ford?
Don't use him as a stunt pilot.
He likes to land on golf courses, apparently.
Golf courses and taxiways, from what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't he have some? He has some vintage stuff. I don't know how old it is, but I know he's got some vintage planes. Perhaps there might be something there that can assist you.
Well, it's got to be vintage and French.
Vintage.
We'll see if it's. I don't think he has World War I, but I know he has World War II. Stuff.
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention quickly 2 other harrowing moments. One was we were filming up at Lake Huca, as Derek said, and it was the year prior to the F-boat, and there was an old, very, very old model A1 Triad that the museum was testing out, and there was a pilot who had never flown this type of aircraft before, and he wanted to try it out. We happened to be there when they were doing that, so we were filming them, and this pilot, unfortunately, just got off the water and then actually crashed into the water, and the propeller broke and flew across the lake. So that was a little scary. Luckily, the pilot was not hurt, and the aircraft, they brought it back to the museum, so that was, that wasn't part of our movie. We weren't sure if we were going to use that in the film, but we did film that. And then in that same shoot, as Derek mentioned, they put me in a Piper Cub and took the door off, and then we flew over the lake trying to film this airplane. And I'd never done that before, and I was hand-holding the camera, and then I recall that the airplane that I was in dipped steeply toward the lake, dropping one wing down, and I was kind of hanging out the door. I was strapped in, but I was this is interesting.
Oh.
So, nothing happened, but you were talking about hair-raising moments, and that was one for me, kind of hanging out the door of an airplane filming.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, in hindsight, now that everything worked out, it's pretty cool. In my movie, I was just worried we were going to get rained on. So you guys are like, next leveling it. It's great.
Now, Ron, you're in my neck of the woods locally in LA, aren't you?
Yep. I'm in Culver City.
Yeah, I thought that you were in my neck of the woods. Yes, right there.
I live in Van Nuys.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe all this fun stuff is happening in my backyard, and I didn't know about it until I found out about the Millionaires Unit. And everybody can now.
Well,
Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say we're showing the movie this Saturday at the Museum of Flying in Santa Monica. And it starts at 7 o'clock, and we'd love to see anybody there who wants to come.
And in the meantime, everybody can go to millionairesunit.org and they can buy the DVD and Blu-ray right now. And tomorrow, or the 15th, which is, Thursday, it's available on VOD. Yes?
Indeed.
Yes,
And if you're really
to,
interested in World War I aviation, there are 4 supplemental films on the DVD Blu-ray, and one of them is just 15 minutes, and it's on flying the Sopwith Camel, just about how difficult and interesting that plane is to fly.
Oh, well, guys, unfortunately, we are all out of time today. I could talk to you about this documentary forever because I am so in love with it. I was fascinated by it. I even watched, some of the features, including the Sopwith Camel, because I just think the Sopwith Camel is very cool. And I just cannot recommend this highly enough. It is a very important piece of history for the United States and for aviation in general, as well as these young men. To see these young men, they weren't drafted. Nobody said, hey, will you come do this? They took it upon themselves to put together this group of flyers and to put forth the effort to spearhead and bring the Naval Reserve to fruition. And I just think it's a story that isn't told in schools. It should be, but thankfully we now have this DVD, this film that we can look to for historical reference. And hats off to you guys. It's an amazing piece of work.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Debbie and Kevin. Thanks for your interest.
Well, hopefully you guys will come back on the show in the near future, I hope.
We'd love to.
Love to.
Ron, I got to find you somewhere in Culver City.
Yep, I'm here.
As am I when I'm not in Whittier. Guys, thank you so much. Again, Ron King, Derek Greer, Millionaires Unit. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. And that's always my hard part, is playing with the little red buttons. Well, and thank you, Kevin Good, for being here today.
It has been my pleasure.
I love your question about safety with the planes.
I know. I didn't know if they want to answer it or not, because it's one of those things where it's like if they did actually have a problem, then they really don't want to talk about it. But if they just had some wings dipping and feeling like they're going to fall out of an airplane, then that's a great story.
We didn't have Harrison landing on a golf course, so
yeah.
So we're okay. And of course, we must thank your fabulous wife, Jenna St. John, for being here. And of course, Chaucer Good, who was
Love you guys.
Who was very, very good for. He could have stayed. He wasn't getting squealy or anything.
He was getting vocal. Yeah.
Well,
he wanted to be part of the show.
He wanted to compete with Dad. So now everybody can see Dinner with the Alchemist tomorrow. Tell them where.
On Amazon Prime. So if you're a Prime member, you can watch that for free. And iTunes and Google Play. You can rent it or buy it.
Now, is it coming out on DVD or Blu-ray yet?
It is not. We're just doing the VOD thing because I'm new school and I don't know people who put these shiny discs into devices anymore. Everybody just does the,
Oh, well, I guess we're going to have to hook you up with Derek and Ron so they can tell you how to get, your film on shiny little devices.
Those are great little, that's a great looking, they did a good job with this. This disc. In the artwork and everything. It looks fantastic.
No, it's fabulous. But but Dinner with the Alchemist is equally fabulous.
Thank you.
And we're in the middle of Mardi Gras, so it's a perfect time for people to see it.
It is exciting. It's crazy. It's been a long road. I mean, Jenna was working on the script and trying to bring the movie into production when I met her. And now we are married with child.
Wow.
And we're finally releasing this thing. So it's a long haul and a lot of work. I've never worked on anything harder. So it's exciting.
And I'm so glad I've been along for the past 2 years of this journey with you.
Good, us too, yeah.
This has been fun.
It's exciting to push our little Bambi out into the forest by itself now.
Well, and you will come back on the show again.
Of course, absolutely.
You've got so many projects going on that you have to.
We say that Dinner with the Alchemist is Chaucer's older brother. That was our first child. So
Yes. Well, I want to see Gwendolyn Dangerous. I want to see something happen with that
Me too. It's coming. It's coming.
because I love that pilot show you did.
Oh, great. We're working hard on it. We have more episodes. You will see it.
Oh,
It's
wonderful.
in the works.
All
Yeah.
right, yeah, because you have to come back and talk about that. It is a retro sci-fi a la Flash Gordon, and it is amazing.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
With a Dogosaurus as an alien.
Flash Gordon was a Dogosaurus. They had a Lizardosaurus in the original Flash Gordon, so I figured.
But you got a Dogosaurus.
Yeah.
Well, that is all the time we have today before Pam gives me the evil eye in there. So, next week, Mark Pellington. It's up in the air whether Mark's going to be calling in live because he's going to be in New York shooting a pilot, or if we're going to pre-record him later this week. But no matter what, we will have something from Mark Pellington next week to talk about his new film, Nostalgia. In the meantime, I'm Debbie Elias. This is Behind the Lens.